Okay, year 10, let's get started with tissue. As you know, I always start by looking at the opening of the poem, and the title is the opening of the poem. So the title, we look at what it suggests to us. The use of the word tissue, which we did as our do now in our activity for the introduction, it gives us an idea about it being something. It's got two meanings, okay? So it's got two meanings, the word tissue. That's why I've written the word two meanings, okay? Can you see that? I'm saying meaning number one is a paper, and meaning number two, it means a human body part. Remember, we have our tissue, oops, not party, part, okay? So we talk about our human tissues, and we talk about paper tissue. So already she has given us a word that we can see in two ways. And because we can use that in two ways, this entire poem, we can say, is an extended metaphor. Now, I've already told you that, so I'm not going to beleaguer the point about an extended metaphor. We know that basically it goes through the whole poem, and it's that comparison. And really, the comparison is this paper with this human bodies. Okay? So if we just concentrate on, instead of it being a body part, on the humans, okay, then we get a better idea. So this is the extended metaphor. And by using this extended metaphor, essentially, it is a comparing human life with paper, because she starts the poem talking about tissue, and then the very first word is paper. And that really gives us a focus on what the poem is going to be about. There's our comparison. So already we've got this metaphor, and we're going to use that when we talk about what the poem is about. In what way could we compare then the humans with paper? Well, let's talk about flimsy. Okay? We use the word tissue. We haven't said paper yet, we've said tissue. And we know that tissue itself, like a tissue that we blow our nose on, it's very flimsy kinds of paper. Okay? And therefore, we can go through that kind of an idea, that kind of a comparison. What else can we say is tissue? Okay? For human tissue, it's an external covering. We talk about our skin tissue, don't we? And therefore, it's an external covering. So we could go down that way of using the extended metaphor. So you see my orange pen is out. This is when we can say what is the message of the poem. And when we talk about this extended metaphor, it's always good to have more than one. And I've gone with the possibility we could go through this one to talk about it. The possibility we could talk about the external covering, and you see I've left space, so I'm going to add words now. And I've got one more that I can talk about. It's not just flimsy with the word tissue rather than paper or cardboard. It's not just an external covering, okay? It actually is, when we talk about it being humans, it's a source of our life, okay? So actually our tissues are what make us human. So our heart tissues, our lung tissues, etc., these things make us work as humans. Okay? So the source of our life stroke humanity. Okay, so let's go into some detail about these possible messages then. When we talk about it being a source of life and humanity, what are we getting when we use the word tissue, meaning that it's human? What we're saying is that having a body gives us power, doesn't it? So It's questioning, and I will use that as questioning because it doesn't have to be doing this. We have a choice in what we think it means, remember? It could be questioning whether whether we have power over our lives. Couldn't it? Is it the fact that our body has power over itself, or is it the fact that we have power over ourselves? I don't know. Let's see what the poem says. We're also thinking about it being potential for an external covering. You know, our tissue, we wrap our presents in tissue paper, and our tissues, the biggest tissue we have is our organ of our skin. So potentially we have our external covering, which I'll put in brackets, our skin. Yeah. Does this define us? Now this is a very topical idea, isn't it? It's all to do with color, culture, yes, and origin. So where do we come from? What is our culture? What is the color of our skin? All those external coverings, do they define us? Right? And we've talked about it being flimsy because we haven't used sort of cardboard, we've said tissue. And we're having to use that because we can take that word in two meanings of the word. Okay? But it is very flimsy. So it also questions whether our own view, can you see that? Good, of ourselves is comparably or comparably, depends which country you come from, yeah, flimsy. Maybe we don't see ourselves as we really are. Maybe the whole image that we build up for ourselves, yes, is just completely flimsy like tissue paper. It can be ripped down and we start again. Okay? We should definitely be questioning whether we really should be coming up with this strong view of ourselves. Maybe everything is that we are equal. And I'd like to consider the ideas of equality and acceptance of differences all the way through the poem. Because realistically, if everyone is equally flimsy, then everyone is the same. If everyone is equally flimsy, then we have to accept all differences as being completely irrelevant because we are all equally flimsy. Okay? So it really does question our own humanity. This is why this is one of the hardest poems, because it is an extended metaphor. By using the word tissue, if you remember, we look at the way that the word is used, this word which has two or more meanings, and we do that a lot. We're going to look at that a couple of times in this poem. Now this poem we're not going to annotate in the same way as the other poems, so we are not going to scribble unbelievably all through the poem. It's 3 pages long. It's impossible. I'm just going to give you the highlights, okay? And realistically that's quite easy. So let's crack on. Form. Always hit form first, because as you know from discussing sonnets, our form defines what kind of a poem it is. Okay, sorry about that, boys are fighting. So, the form of this poem is really obvious, okay? What you're noticing is, you're noticing 4 lines in each stanza all the way through until you get to the bottom. And then this 10th stanza has only 1 line. So we're going to talk about that definitely. So we're going to talk about the form. And we counted, and we say 10 stanzas. And it can be relatively mathematical when we deal with this. 10 stanzas shows it's organized last stanza stands out, so to speak, and we will definitely talk about it. Okay? It shows it's pretty well organized, and they are, if we want to use our writer's terminology, they're quatrains. Okay? They have 4 lines. Quatre in French means 4. Therefore, they're quatrains. And there are 10 stanzas, each of them a quatrain except for the last one. What's the meter of this then? Well, it doesn't have a regular length of stanza. You can see it's shorter, longer. It doesn't have any kind of scheme when we talk about the number of syllables. Therefore, we call it free verse. All right? And in fact, this is very much mimicking natural speech. Okay? Because it's acting as natural speech. Let's check for rhyme. What have we got? The rhyme scheme is non-existent. Okay? So it's unrhymed. And irregular. That's we can say either way. I like unrhymed better than irregular, but we'll say both to make sure that people write at least one of them down. And when you have something that is unrhymed, the alliteration and the assonance are more important. So that's one of the things we're going to notice, is alliteration and assonance. And we're just going to give ourselves a little note. Because there's a no rhyme, assonance we're going to look for, and alliteration we're going to look for, because they are what will point us to the most important ideas. Right, so let's go for it then. We know that it's not a particular form like a sonnet. Now, I'm just going to point one thing out before we go any further. I just said I wouldn't, and now I'm going to. Who is this poem addressed to? Okay? It's not very clear from the beginning. So what we'll say is, it is only clear that the poem is addressed to a particular reader in the final stanza. That's one reason it's so important. Okay? And now we've been able to show that we've looked at the whole poem. When we write that, we say the poem begins by being a generally well-organized, natural way of expressing a feeling. It's not a monologue, it's not a sonnet, so it's not a love poem, it's not a personal revelation about how you feel. Actually, this is addressed to a particular person, but we don't know that until the end. So let's go through it from the beginning. Now, when we talk about poems, obviously we need to think beginning, middle, end. Okay? And then we talk about language ideas, so soapaims, structure, and form. So what can we say about form? We can say that it's very free, which means that the poet has been able to really explore their feelings unhindered by any restrictions other than the quatrains, and that they've really meant that the final stanza to stand out, and therefore you would really talk about the form toward the end of your essay, because you'd want to talk about it when you talk about how the last stanza stands out. You can definitely mention it at the beginning and say that the poem opens in a clear, organized fashion, so you know that this poet has planned and that they know what they're going to say. It hasn't just come out as it comes out. That's what you can see by the quatrains as well. So what have they said? And we then hit the opening lines. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching, the kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died where and how, on which sepia date pages, smoothed and stroked and turned, transparent, with attention. You are noticing already this alliteration, aren't you, I hope? Let's just hit the beginning first. Paper is clearly the focus of the poem, okay? That's not really something you would need to write other than in the message, where you would say that the extended metaphor, and this gives you more idea what that real focus of the poem is. However, if we consider that paper lets the light, I'm going to say alliteration. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to underline the words in a particular semantic field, because that's another thing I've immediately seen. Okay? I've got light, shining, altar, Quran. Okay? So I have here a semantic field. Now, you're going to say, what is that? That is a language device. That's a SOPAMES. A semantic field of religion. So there is a religious semantic field. All right? And those are the words that I've seen, and I've underlined them there. And they're not being clear about whether this is a Christian or Muslim. And you are able to bring in your bit of context here and say, oh yes, because she identifies the poet as being a Calvinist, which is a Christian, Protestant faith from Scotland. So you notice that in her own identity, she questions who she is, and that she is not just one thing and in one group with one origin. She calls herself a Scottish Pakistani. She calls herself a Calvinist Muslim. And you would definitely bring that in when you talk about how the religious semantic field immediately starts to join two major faiths of the world together. Now this word altar, if it was a real altar, a church altar, where the ordinances of the sacrament are performed in the Christian faith, it would have an A, altar. Okay? So it's a homophone, which means it sounds the same, but it's spelled differently. All right? And it still works, this homophone, which is a language technique. That's why I'm making it blue. It still works as religious imagery because we can see it as an altar, but it means something as well as a religious thing. Altar means change. So here, I think that's the way she means it, because that's the way she's spelled it. This is the way you spell it if you mean change. Therefore, she's saying paper that lets the light shine through. This kind of paper is what could alter things. This is what could change the way things are done. Okay? And it kind of gets you to question, doesn't you? Can we do it ourselves? Because we are being compared to the paper. We're being metaphored, tissue, humans. So therefore, can humans change things ourselves? It also, notice I always explore possible meanings. So because poems don't mean just one thing, we have to go, well, it could mean this or it could mean this. Therefore, it could mean, can we do it ourselves? Or it could be saying, as a more declarative statement, we can change the way things are. Okay? And she seems to possibly be saying, this is what... Notice how she uses this modal verb. I'm always telling you to use modal verbs. I'm saying, don't be absolutely accurate. This is not the only meaning. Use a modal verb. Say it could be the meaning, or it might be the meaning. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. I have a little boy who needs to be outside. Okay. So, we have the possibility of the two meanings. look at this alliteration, which I'm going back to. I don't want to just say, ooh, it's alliteration and point my finger. I want to say, ooh, it's alliteration, and what does this alliteration do? Okay, so what is it doing? People, remember paper equals people, can let the light shine through. And we're saying this religious idea. So God is the light which is shining. So people cannot, okay, because we have to let the light shine through. So we so we cannot stop the truth. Okay? The light is always going to shine through. And a lot of the truth that we're being questioned here is, okay, and I always have lots of arrows on these kind of does this work and does that work. And this arrow goes very much with our, what does this poem really mean? So therefore it's a message, question mark. Religious imagery plus alliteration equals, does God, with a capital G, because she clearly believes in God with a capital G, so therefore, does God show us how we should view ourselves and our power? Okay, it's a question. Remember, all poets ask questions and make points, and we have to question them. And what does God say about humans? What does he say? Yes, I prefer all these people and not them. No, he doesn't. He says equality. Okay? Because you know very well, if you were brought up in a Christian faith, that all men are equal. It's the love thy neighbor principle, isn't it? Okay? And it seems to me that we could then easily break in our last point, which is our point about the end of the poem. So I'm getting ready. Look at that. Arrow, 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 arrow. And I've got one more arrow here to bring in my point about the end of the poem. So let's nip, now that we've started the beginning. Darker is the poet, seems to be suggesting that people have power to alter things. We can, if we want to, change things. And we're using the modal verb to suggest that we can, but we don't have to. However, we cannot, because we let the light, and that alliteration, we cannot stop the truth from outing, which is that we are all equal, and therefore there's a should. We should change the way things are. We should change the way that we are not equal here on the earth. And actually, the way she ends the poem then, it's useful to... She talks about the end of the poem. Let's start... Where have we got? We'll start at the end of the poem. This is the last sort of sentence. Are we ready? This is the last page. An architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers, over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through. Look at that. Again, that repetition, that's an interesting new word, that idea which is repeated over letting the light. So that is a repetition of the same idea from the beginning. Thus the pink structure point equals repetition. We cannot, and it's that bit of alliteration, isn't it? Okay? It's letting the light. So that truth has to happen. We know the truth. Why aren't we changing things? Okay? So why would we would never wish to again build with brick or block, but we would let the daylight break through, capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make, find a way to trace a grand design. Notice I'm just putting a pink here because we're going to see the word find. which is kind of like a commanding word, right? Oops, that shouldn't have been pink, that should have been blue. What am I doing? Okay, now I can't even read it. Never mind, it's purple. Okay, so it's commanding us to find a way. Notice how it's being placed at the beginning of the line. I know why I needed the pink. After the comma. So the punctuation is making a massive difference to how we see that word. And it therefore becomes a command because it's at the beginning of the line. All right, I'm doing a bad job with that, sorry. So trace a grand design with living tissue, another punctuation, and another command. Raise a structure never meant to last. So we've been commanded to find a way. We've commanded to raise a structure, or requested, maybe not commanded. Okay, and this is the kind of thing we were meant to do. It's not meant to last, but it's of paper. So what do we say when we see paper? We say lives, smoothed and stroked. What are we seeing here? Now, you might say, oh, that's sinister. Or it could just be slowing us down, because that's what happens. So we're going to say it's slowing us down. Doesn't seem that sinister when we're talking about equality and acceptance. So I'm thinking slowing us down until the end comment. All right? Smoothed and stroked and thinned. So even the structure is working. So we've got the and, yes? It's supposed to be, it's almost a list, isn't it? Because realistically, you're supposed to put paper smoothed, comma, stroked, and thinned. Therefore, using the and is obviously done structurally on purpose to emphasize the fact that this is a list. So we need to have a look at these commands to see what we are going to be. And we are going to be transparent. And that is a focus. Oh, but there's still a comma. We're going to be transparent. We're going to be turned into your skin. We've got a direct address. Now, to whom is this poem directed then? Well, obviously, you're reading it, and therefore, you. So this poem is being directed to you. She is confronting us in the Western world. Yes? Can you see that? It's a direct address to us in the Western world to request our acceptance. Now, where have you seen this before? The Emigre. Great poem to compare then. Okay? She wants our acceptance. So how can we then link this back? This is a terrific poem where we get to see the end is slightly different to the beginning. Because in the beginning, she requests us to alter things straight away. And therefore, this is very likely to be a poem personally addressed from a minority to the white Western Christian majority, saying, please, God made us the same. Please accept us. Okay? We are all the same. Tissue is a potential poem with the extended metaphor comparing human life to paper, requesting us to look at more than what's on the outside, but the fact that all of humanity has power over their lives, they're all equal, and they should all be accepted as equal. Okay, that's a really great answer. We're going to start going down. We're going to say, what does she say about paper that we can then talk about? All right. She uses a lot of T's, and you'll see a lot of alliteration. You will also see that she asks a lot of questions in the first page. Okay, so she's going to ask a lot of questions because she's almost saying, why can't we? Why can't we? Why can't we? Okay, it's almost like that repetition of saying, well, why can't we change things? Notice how she's not talking about our religious text, the Bible. She's talking about the Quran, okay? And she's talking, therefore, and she's using the Quran because we are not as familiar with it. And she's saying, by just using the Muslim text, which is a religious text, we've said that with our underlining, it shows, by comparing the Muslim text, and in our head we then go, oh yes, our Bible is just the same. She compares Muslims to Christians. And the way that they behave. And how similar they are. Okay? In fact, she talks about a hand writing the names and histories in the back of this well-used book. And in fact, we know that family Bibles, in the front of family Bibles, it used to have our family histories. And clearly, in the back of the Quran, that's where they have their names and their histories. So all these are comparisons. And we talk about relationships are similar. What else is similar? Who was born to whom? All these names and histories and relationships are all very, very similar. When we talk about the handwriting in the names, we focus on the use of the word hand because of the enjambment, okay? And it kind of takes away, we take away the focus on who is doing it by putting hand at the end and no punctuation. So this takes away the focus on the hand, on the person, okay? I've got pen all over me now. Writing the details, and it's really focusing our attention to this, the fact that the details are similar. Okay? And that is enjambment. That's the way enjambment works. It makes the lines keep going and going. This is how it worked with Kamikaze, where she only used 3 full stops in the whole poem. And it really meant that she was working her way through that poem as she thought and thought and thought, and it put the focus a lot of the time on the beginning of the line rather than the end, and therefore it makes us start the beginning of the line with the emphasis and take away the emphasis on the end, which is how we would normally have it. Obviously, caesura works in a similar way because we make the end of the line in the middle, so it puts the emphasis here. So you could say that this comma in the middle, which is a caesura, is putting the emphasis on the use of the word Quran, which is a Muslim text, and therefore we're comparing it because of that caesura. However, it takes the emphasis away from who's actually doing the writing, and it's more on the actual relationships. So we go through, and we're just at who's born to who, the height and weight, who died where, on how. Okay, let's look at all these words. We've got who, whom, who, where, how, which. What are these question words doing? Okay? These question words are really showing us how similar the relationships are. So not only is the caesura leading us to question it, the question words are leading us to question. Well, we're all the same. All these little details, okay? And by using the breaking it up with the caesura, yes? All this caesura and it's breaking it up and showing that these little details okay, they're little details, aren't they? Who, what, where, height, weight, family relationship. These little details are the same worldwide. Yep, everybody has a mum and a dad. Everybody cares about what babies were weighed when they were born and what they weighed. I mean, really, honestly, who cares what you weigh when you're dead? You only really care what people weigh when they're born and when they're little, and we think it's great. Okay? So this is about life, you know, height, weight, and the details are the same. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. It could be Muslim. Christians do it too. We do ours in the front of the Bible. They do theirs in the back of the Quran. Okay. Look at how we use the word transparent here. Now, something I'd like to point out is I'm using pink on purpose here. Now, we've turned these pages in the Quran regularly because we've stroked and smoothed them and turned them transparent. Do you see that alliteration? We've turned them transparent ourselves by smoothing and stroking. Smoothing and stroking is when you spend time. So we slow ourselves down by saying this alliteration, and these words actually mean that you're spending time focusing on the little details. Okay, but actually it's the little details which show how similar we are. Now that probably says, Miss, how on earth did you see that? And I can't see it. When we spend time focusing on the height and weight of babies, it's a little detail. And it's all these little details across the countries where everybody's doing the same thing that show how similar everybody really is, irrelevant color, culture, origin. Okay? And when we use the word transparent, we're saying it is see-through, aren't we? So see-through can mean two things. So therefore transparent can mean two things. Actually, we see through the small details to the equality beneath. Or we're saying that it's transparent with attention, and therefore it is easily able to show light. Remember, transparent means light comes through. So does translucent. Okay? Show light through, which shows we're equal. Alright. Now I promised that I would not do a long video, and I've broken my promise here, and I am very sorry. But I am seriously almost done, and I don't know if I want to do 2 videos or... yes, I think I'll just stop here and we'll do 2 videos. So this is the end of video 1. Breathe and have a drink. And we'll finish the last short bit in a second.